Well, as well. Psychology work.
Cognitive psychology,
Cognitive
yeah, applied cognitive psychology.
So we want to kind of learn from you and then this for the people listening and learn about your experience. So let's just start out with, you were born as so your both your parents have PhDs.
Both my parents are economists. My mom's an econometrician. They actually, my father's been in academia for his whole career and my mom in industry. So I kind of got to see the dynamics of both those choices from the get-go. And I always say my rebellion against my parents was through basically going to university. I went to Columbia. I started taking some economics classes, was not a fan. And I learned about psychology and learned about behavioral economics. And I was like, this is it. This is how I'm gonna rebel against my parents and, you know, understand that humans are not rational beings. And
this is the 90s and this is brand new.
yeah, this was very, yeah, exactly. So, yeah, so I mean, they came around. They're now definitely on.
We're all right here on this now.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
And then what brought you to PhD?
Yeah, so when I graduated from Columbia, I started working in various labs and was working for both social and cognitive psychologists and decided, you know, this is what I want to do. I really admired this particular PhD student. And she had sort of served as a mentor and advised me on graduate school. And at that time, I was also TAing for the intro neuroscience class at Columbia, mind, brain, and behavior. And that is when I really got into this field of neuroeconomics. And at this point, I was really just studying it from afar. And I learned about the person sitting next to me, Paul. And I had a few criteria when looking at graduate schools. I really wanted to return to California. That was where I grew up. I grew up in the Bay Area. And I really wanted to study neuroeconomics. At that point in time, there were not many places that served both those purposes. And so I thought, you know, I'm going to give this a shot. I'm going to apply to Claremont and see what happens. And you know, the rest is history.
But you came in through the cognitive psych program
I did.
here, and I think that's a great Claremont story, which is very flexible. You can do some coursework in your field, but you can kind of do your dissertation research anywhere.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. So I applied to the psychology program. I was interested in cognitive psychology. And yeah, through, you know, understanding what different professors were working on, of course, my interests were very aligned with working with Paul, but it was definitely super interdisciplinary at that time. And that's what really drew me to this particular place.
Then you did something very unusual, which is you worked full-time the last 2 years.
I did about, you know, I would say I worked part-time all of the time. I worked part-time 4 years. So I did my PhD in 4 years. So I did a master's and a PhD in that period of time. I think I worked, yes, very unusual. I worked pretty much from the get-go part-time for a market research company. Also through a connection from Paul, actually. He was my first contact that got me in my first job during the PhD program. And then, yes, the last 2 years while I was primarily writing my dissertation, I was working full-time. And when you think about writing a dissertation on top of work, that means nights, weekends. I was working for a startup, so that was already like a 65+hour-a-week job. And I remember in New York, yeah, I was also away from the lab, so I had limited access and had to, of course, effectively use a lot of, you know, data that I had already collected from my master's degree, think really strategically about what data I could use. You know, there was a lot of, yeah, innovation and ingenuity in figuring out what I could do with what I had. But I was at the time working full-time and spent every weekend at the library at Columbia University writing out my dissertation. And my husband at the time was doing his MBA at Columbia, and so we both spent weekends at the library.
Still your husband?
Still my husband, yes, for 15 years,
And 2
married,
children.
and 3 kids,
That's
yes.
great.
So we did not have kids back then, I will clarify that.
So also despite your father, the academic,
Yeah.
you worked in a startup in New York City, you were at digital, and then you said, hey, I have a lot of options here, but you stayed in industry. So tell us about that decision.
Yeah.
How did the startup go, first of all?
Startup was a little rocky, I have to say. I worked for a few startups in my time, and I think you learn a lot about yourself and where you fall on like a risk profile continuum, I would say. So startups at times can be very risky, and that can be ambiguity associated with your role and actually what you are supposed to be doing for the company. That can be ambiguity about funding sources. And so, initially I went with where I could get a job, right? When you're fresh out of, or you're still a PhD student, you apply everywhere, and that's, initially where I landed. Through the course of working there, I realized startups, my risk profile was not in line with startups, and that was okay. The next time I applied for jobs, I had more work experience, and that, favored me to apply to other jobs that, catered to those specific, experiences and sort of characteristics that I had developed. And that led to the next thing. So I think, one of my big learnings was really to never fixate on the ideal job, but potentially think of things as stepping stones. So getting a job gives you some experience that can catapult you to another job eventually. And that's something that I used earlier on in my career quite a bit.
So you went to the startup, moved back to California, as I remember.
Yes.
And worked for them.
So at that point, post-PhD, so at that point I finished my PhD. And an interesting story, I traveled to actually the same conference I am here for this week. I'm going to a conference later this week. I was traveling to Brazil to give a talk at the Neuromarketing World Forum, which is this conference in this really small area of research, right, where I had done my PhD. And I had applied for an award that they offer for new students. It was an early career kind of researcher award. And I won the award. And so I got to go to Brazil and give like a 7-minute talk about my dissertation work. And it was at this conference where I got to meet kind of all the big players in this small industry of neuromarketing, or now consumer neuroscience. It's called a variety of things. And I remember physically, back then, we like printed resumes, right? I physically printed my resume, and I remember meeting with these people that to me, they were, stars in their field, some academics, some industry professionals, but people that I admired. And I was just finishing my PhD and was there to give this talk. And I remember physically handing people my resume. Like I literally talked people up. I remember standing in line for the bathroom and seeing this woman who ended up being my future boss. And I literally handed her my resume. And then I went and gave a killer talk. And, a month later, 2 budgets were put together and they offered me a job at Ipsos. And so I basically created a role for myself by showing, that I was eager, that I was capable by giving this talk. And that I really wanted to work in this field. So there were no jobs, like there was no like LinkedIn to go apply for things. This was all through like old school networking, literally line at the bathroom, handing a resume.
But even now, so a couple lessons. Number
Yeah.
one, apply for the awards, right? So
Yeah.
you get some attention.
Yeah.
Number 2, give the killer talk. And number 3, network.
Yes. I will say we're in a really different market now. So like learning, it's great to learn from my experience, but I think one of the things that's discounted often, and when you talk to people that are 10+ years post PhD, is like the market is very different now. What worked for me very well may not work exactly for you in this environment. And so I would also encourage everyone to talk to people who are really recent graduates who have landed jobs and learn what they did, because they are going to have much more relevant from a situation and environment kind of perspective for you. So take my story as, one example from 10+ years ago.
But you can network on LinkedIn now, really
Of
easily.
course.
So all these superstar people you talked about that you may meet at a conference,
Yep.
you just ping them on LinkedIn. And most people are pretty nice in my experience on LinkedIn, like, hey, I'm graduating, I really am impressed with what you've done, and, could you offer me any advice, or just have a conversation?
And there are ways to do this better or worse too. And I think, if you take the time to really learn about the person you're interested in meeting, find something you have in common, mention that in a really short LinkedIn message. Like now I'm on the receiving ends of these all the time and I get hundreds of things from students. I can't possibly meet with all of them. If it's someone I know that reaches out on someone's behalf, I'm much more likely to say yes to a call. If someone takes the time to learn something unique about me and mentions that in a really well-crafted message, I'm much more likely to make time for them. So.
I should say, we'll have time for questions, but I want to go through a little more work history. So worked at Ipsos for a couple of years.
Yep.
And then next couple of jobs were.
Yeah, so 2.5 years at Ipsos, I moved to a startup. So again, I didn't learn from my prior experience exactly. I made mistakes and there's no upwards trajectory. I went to a startup for a bigger role to take on the head of research role at this company that no longer exists, but it was bought by UserZoom. UserZoom is one of the sort of standard tools that's in the user experience research space now. So there I got the experience of managing a larger team. I think I had about 10 people. I also got the experience of being on an executive team for the first time. I got the experience of having to lay people off. I got the experience of learning that some of the promises and things that were told to me maybe were changing really rapidly and had to make some really tough calls. And 3 months later, I decided to leave the company and I actually had another offer. So very, very stressful time. Something I learned a lot from, and I had another very rapid switch over following this, which is also an interesting story. So I went from UI, this company that is now owned by UserZoom, to SurveyMonkey. I was only at SurveyMonkey a couple of months as well. SurveyMonkey at the time has now gone through, changes of names, and now it's back to SurveyMonkey, if anyone's familiar with the company, but it's based in Silicon Valley, tech company, and produces your kind of standard survey tool. And I had an individual contributor role there, but I was kind of a research expert selling this SurveyMonkey tool to clients. Was only there for a short amount of time because I got contacted over LinkedIn by the head of research at Facebook for an opportunity. And so at this point, my resume was like sort of interesting. I worked at Ipsos for a few years. I had this PhD. I had, I'd shown some progression, or I had some experience, and I had managed people. And Facebook was a company at the time that I really admired. This is definitely the glory days of Facebook. I may share, and I do too, different perceptions now. But at this time, they were interested in bringing me in to interview for a managerial role. And management had always been of interest to me. I had managed previously. And so I went in and interviewed. And this was one of those interviews where, it's a full day kind of loop that you go through, right? So like many rounds, I think you have to give a presentation. And I just acted as if I had the role, basically. Like I just showed up very confident. I told them exactly what I didn't know. And for whatever reason, they decided to, bring me on and take what I felt like at the time was a bit of a risk on me. I didn't have a big tech background. I had 2 short careers, moves in the last few months. But I could tell the story to them that like, this past role at SurveyMonkey wasn't a management role. This Facebook role is much more aligned with what I want to do. And the prior company was literally going under. And so I could explain the transitions that I had gone through. And I joined Facebook, got to manage a team of, I think, about 10 or so people, and really got immersed into what it's like to work for a technology company, a real technology company at a large scale. And that was a wonderful experience. I felt very aligned at the time with pretty much everything about the company. It was probably one of the best roles, probably besides the role I'm currently in, probably the best role that has been a, strong fit for me.
And then what kind of pulled you out of Facebook? You were there, what, about 4 years?
No, I was only there for about a year and a half.
Oh, okay.
So I actually had a relatively short, so when you hear that, it sounds short. In tech, like a year is like 10 years, so that's literally what they tell you. So like the average tenure is 18 months at these big tech companies. So staying there a year and a half is pretty much expected, because you kind of rotate through oftentimes. I would say the market we're currently in the last like couple of years, that is not as much the case. But this was back when the market was very hot. It was very normal to leave a year or so in. So then something sort of similar happened to me. I got reached out over LinkedIn for a bigger opportunity. And it was a executive recruiter at Pinterest saying, we're interested in, bringing you on as the head of insights for our advertising business. And it was basically the same role I did at Facebook. But instead of managing a team of 10, it was going to be a bigger role. It was a team of 20, and it was a global scope instead of just a North American scope. Now, of course, they also made, once I went through the interview and had, a successful sort of process there, the compensation difference that I was offered was so great. It was something I could not turn down at that point in my career. So that I would say was a really pivotal role for me in terms of reaching the point of like managing managers, getting a lot more exposure to executives at a company. This was pre-Pinterest IPO. So there was so many interesting things happening at the company, really trying to prove the value of advertising on Pinterest, doing a ton of hiring. And that was the next year and a half.
Do you feel like you did accomplish what you thought you'd accomplish at Pinterest?
I did. In fact, some of the people I hired there are still there, like 6+ years later. And the company went public shortly after I left, actually. And, in terms of the success of the company now, some of the core sort of, I would say, narratives that my research team developed around Pinterest being, not about sort of sharing your personal life with others, but much more about what's important to you and understanding if you think of a marketing funnel, for example, people on Pinterest are much closer to taking action because they're there to search for something that they are curating in a board for themselves. So it's much more akin to a Google search versus a Facebook that is more about, here's my life, external facing. And so we did a bunch of the research, or I'd say my team did a bunch of the research that sort of drew some of those conclusions that helped us position ourselves for the initial public offering. So absolutely, I'm really proud of some of that work. And I think that, led to a ton of success for Pinterest.
So I think a couple of lessons I draw from that. Number one, have a story. Every time you interview, you had a good story about what you're doing. Keep your LinkedIn profile current. See people on LinkedIn and like, you don't even work there anymore and your title says something, like, keep it current. You never know. People reach out all the time. And the third is really think about how you create value for that organization. Right. So I think you were super clear on, here's the value I'm going to bring to Pinterest. Still a risk, I'm hiring you, right? But if I'm there, here's the things I can do. I've demonstrated I can do similar things. I can do it much better, bigger, or whatever.
Yeah, so I remember being interviewed by, I think it was the chief sales officer at Pinterest for that role. And I literally brought to him a 7-page document that I had prepared saying, here's exactly my strategy for how I would organize the team. So basically I took my learnings from my time at Facebook and applied it to their business and came with a document and said, I thought through how to do this job. And so, I mean, that, do the homework,
Yeah,
like that's how you get the job. So yeah, be prepared. I guess is the short answer, and like go above and beyond. Those things really do matter. Now, I did leave Pinterest by choice, about, again, 18 months later, almost to the dot. I moved to Uber and had a competing offer at Uber. This time to lead the people research function at Uber. And so I actually drew, during those 18 months, I started to, I don't know, come to an understanding that I wanted to feel more connected to the work my team was doing, and that advertising may not be the be all end all of the space that I want my legacy or value to, be associated with. And so at that point, I kind of thought, I started applying for other roles across top tech companies. I got this opportunity at Uber. I was really fascinated on the sort of people side of things. And the people research team within Uber reported to people analytics, which was in HR. And at this point, I'm a very passionate people manager. I care a lot about developing people. And I always thought if I was not in the advertising side, the sort of marketing, sales, advertising side of the tech company, could I thrive in the people side, the HR side of the house? And so that's what I did at Uber. Again, went through interviews, presented my experience, talked about my management philosophy and how passionate I was about management, and basically made the case for, if we are studying things that, like, my values align more with this opportunity, is essentially the story there. And therefore, me applying myself here is gonna be a really strong fit for you all. So I didn't have the exact experience, but I had a lot of other experience that was really relevant, and I made that case really strong for them. So I came on to lead this people research team, which consisted of data scientists, people researchers, basically people with social science PhDs that were studying the employees of Uber, not the drivers, the actual business side employees of Uber, understanding the culture at Uber, opportunities to, intervene or make improvements to the culture. And this was post Susan Fowler's, if you're aware of the sexual harassment scandal that went on. Uber had just been through a whole lot with a change in CEO. Dara became the CEO. And so this was a really interesting time to come into a company and say, I want to understand the culture and improve it, and do research that supports this. And they're willing to, bring on this leader and this team to study that. Still to date, some of my more interesting work, I think, comes from this opportunity. That was Uber.
And then did you boomerang back to one of
I
your
did.
previous companies?
Yeah, I did. So at this point, I found out I was pregnant. So I had my first kid. So yeah, this is kind of interesting. So I was pregnant during my first time at Facebook, and I moved to Pinterest when I was 8 months pregnant. So they hired me at 8 months pregnant.
Big baby.
Huge, right? I literally walked in and, I was supposed to be basically going out on leave, immediately. I remember going to kind of an executive team meeting with a group that was one level down from the president. And they were going around the room and asking leaders, what keeps you up at night? And it's my second day on the job, and I'm 8 months pregnant. And I'm like, oh God, I'm coming up next. What am I gonna say? My second day on the job. And I look around the room and I realize I'm the only woman here. And so I said it. I said, I'm brand new. And the thing that's concerning me after 2 days is the fact that in this group of leaders at this level, I'm the only woman here. And I got so many brownie points for that. The president ended up personally inviting the entire group of senior leaders, one level down, the women, to this meeting going forward. They all personally thanked me. really, really interesting move, but just like, strategically interesting culture at Pinterest, which you can probably gather from, that example. Anyways, fast. At this point at Uber, I was now pregnant with my second child. And so I went out on maternity leave at Uber. And when I came back, layoffs started. This was Uber IPO'd. So I was really fortunate to be there for, a period of time, about 2 years, where, got some stock vested, and then of course the IPO occurred. Went out on this maternity leave, and then all of a sudden they start laying off a variety of people. I learned that my sister research team has been let go. There was actually a behavioral economics team, and I was the equivalent to them in a different part of the business. And at that point, I got very worried, right? I'm just had a baby, I'm out on leave, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this entire team has been let go. They start letting go of all of the user research teams. And again, I'm sitting in my HR space, just waiting for any information. And at this point, Facebook reached back out to me and they said, we hear there are layoffs happening at Uber. Would you be interested in coming back? And, at this point, having 2 kids, I said, I'm definitely interested in interviewing. We'll see how things go. And I interviewed at Facebook, and this time for user experience research, which is their biggest research organization. They had over 1,000 people. So it's kind of joining the more prestigious part of the research culture, I would say. The biggest team at Facebook. It's full of top social scientists. It, at the time was just a place that I idolized a little bit, and I didn't have as much product research experience, and thought that could be interesting. I know there are more roles in product, and so I really at this point thought about my options, right? I want to support my family. I don't know if I'm going to get laid off at Uber. Here's an opportunity to interview, again, for a different type of research that I maybe haven't had as much experience in, but I think I can frame my experience to that type of research. And could that benefit me in the longer term? When I look at the market, there are tons of product research roles because technology companies are largely divided by the business and the product. Those typically are the 2 sides of the tech company. And the product has all the engineers, and they're producing the actual product that goes out to users and or to businesses if you're an enterprise company like I'm at now. And they are kind of the ones that run the company in terms of they're producing the thing that is being sold, right? And so a lot of investment goes into product and engineering to actually produce that thing. The other side of the company, right, the advertising side, the business side of the company is making profit off of said product, but it's very much, I would say not as valued, generally speaking. And this certainly varies by company, but generally speaking, you kind of see this division across tech companies. And again, the tech side of the house is where kind of more of the resources go. So I was quite interested in getting into there. It felt like a special place that I hadn't explored yet. And so I interviewed, and actually I got that role, but I should let you know, between this, I had interviewed at Facebook earlier in between my Pinterest experience at Uber, and I had not gotten 2 roles. So at this point, I have interviewed at Facebook 4 times. And I had 2 successes and 2 failures trying to return. So I think it's important to know it's not just about being good at interviewing. It's very much about fitting yourself into the right opportunity. Interviewing is a skill that can be practiced and learned for sure, but it's not like I only had success. I had plenty of no's along the way. And so, yes, I returned to Facebook. Facebook turned into Meta. I was in the user experience space, managing about 5 different product research verticals. Again, kind of a larger team. And eventually after about 2 years again, now I'm expanding, I've gone from 18 months to like 2 years, as I've slowed down a little bit. I then decide, I feel like my values are not as aligned with Facebook as a company. At this point, they're going into the metaverse, a lot of new things. And I was seeking something a little bit more stable and something that I felt like I could go to work every day and come home to my kids and feel really proud, like that I'm working on this product. And that was a sort of driving value that I was seeking. And I actually applied to the role I had on LinkedIn. I applied literally out of the blue, said, Workday seems like a good company, seems like they have really strong values. I said, this could be interesting because I'd be a director in big tech for the first time. So it's going from kind of senior management levels to director. And I'd be leading like a big research organization, which was really appealing to me, leading other leaders, working in product, but also impacting other parts of the organization. So it's not like they had, they were centralizing research under a new leader. And so they were bringing in a lot of people together. And it just seemed like an opportunity where I really get to practice a lot of the things I learned from my other experiences. Working on a product that helps people do their jobs was really appealing to me. There was a clear use case for Workday. If you're not familiar with it, we're an enterprise software tool that basically does HR and finance things, but it helps people do their jobs, like actually do payroll or, hire people, all those sort of necessary things. So I was interested in working more on necessary and useful things versus like nice to have fun things. I guess I don't know how to describe that distinction well, but that was the trade-off that I made in moving over to Workday, and I'm 2.5 years in already. So that is exciting. I see myself here for quite some time. Yeah. There's so many changes. I've actually just 2 weeks ago taken on a bigger role. I now have a team of almost 40 people. And I'm now managing a director for the first time. So there's just new growth of learning how to manage other leaders. And what I spend my time on now is so different than what I used to spend my time on some of the earlier roles. But there are big challenges. If you're not as familiar with Workday, our user experience has a lot to be desired, unless it is clunky. And there are a lot of dependencies and silos and different teams working on things. And so I deal with a lot of navigating ambiguity. I don't do that much research. I don't even get to advise that much on research anymore. But it's a lot of this like very nebulous advice giving, fact finding, talking to general managers or kind of CEOs of different business units, a lot of people problems. And like I do a lot of HR work because with such a big organization, there's someone in a crisis or there's problems to solve for people. And I somehow enjoy solving those problems. So it's fun.
That sounds great.
Yeah,
Career.
sorry.
This is so interesting. I'm loving this. How about a couple of questions? You guys showed up, which is really great, and we have an online group as well. I guess, Ro, if we get online questions, you could call it out. But how about the people here? First of all, an amazing human being, just had her third child and did all this and married with children and like, how do you do it?
Yeah. What?
So how about for some of the women in the audience? Are you guys concerned about that balance between work and family and school? And it's hard, super hard.
Yeah. Should I take that as a question?
Sure. First, you're a great husband.
Yes, I do. I have an amazing, please go ahead. Yeah, ask away.
So I was inspired by how you were telling about how you have changed sectors going from one job to another.
Yeah.
So how do you fit yourself? Is it like you being a flexible person, you adapt? Or is it like, I don't belong here, I should be somewhere where you fit in, so like, how do you adapt to that new
Yeah, was it
changes?
external
Yeah.
or internal?
A little bit both, but I think it could be. I mean, at some point in time, and I guess I'll take your question around like, when do you know you want to leave a job almost? Okay, yeah. A little bit of both, and sometimes you don't know. And sometimes you know, in several of my examples, I got the other job. And that's where you weigh what you have with like some uncertain thing that you know some about, but you know, there's a higher risk in the unknown, right? So when I was at Facebook the first time, I really loved my job. It was one of the best fit jobs I've ever had. And I saw a huge growth opportunity and a compensation, you know, multiple fold increase. And to me, that was a risk I was willing to take. Did I like the job at Pinterest as much? Quite honestly, no. And did I at times try to return to Facebook? Yes, I mentioned 2 times, and I failed those 2 times. And, you know, to me, do I regret making that move? Would I have been happier staying at Facebook for 10 years or whatever, you know, that period of time? I honestly don't, because I've learned so much from each of the opportunities. And it led me to where I am today. So it's really challenging to reflect back on the hypotheticals of what if I had stayed. I think every job transition is a delicate balance. I do help a lot of people with these types of decisions now. I have a twin sister that got a PhD in social psychology and works in big tech now, and was at Instagram most recently and just left and started a new role. And so I also like coach people on the side on these types of things. So it's very situational. Largely you have to go with your gut, like something inside of you is probably gonna lean one way or the other. Pro con list, of course, you know, the standard things help, but in the end, you just have to weigh those for yourself.
So what's the worst case, as you said? You learn something new, and you go,
Yeah.
yeah, you know what, this is for me, I'll keep working here, but I'll look for something different.
Exactly, I always found with that move in particular, I was betting on myself. So like Pinterest may not have IPO'd. I may have like lost a ton of money by making that move and lost out on this amazing job I had before that I loved. But I bet on like my capabilities of doing some good work and bringing on a good team and something I would learn out of that. And knowing that Pinterest was a brand I felt like would add to my resume at that point. And knowing the move to Uber would too. I thought, well, I'm building a story in the big tech kind of sector, and does this like make sense for my career? Can I see that next path forward? And at each stage I thought, yes, like that's worth it to me, and that's why I made that choice.
So when you are being interviewed, does your employer ask you, what was the reason you're like, how do you cope with those challenging
Yeah.
questions? Because they come at you like,
They do.
so are you like, they will look at you whether you were asked to leave, or was it like, how do you justify that?
Yeah, so you never actually have to disclose why you left a company. Like, there's no rule about that. I do think there's a skill in navigating difficult questions that you get from interviewing over time. So just like when someone asks you what your compensation, you know, range is or something like that, you know, you can always not answer that question. In fact, they are required to give you their compensation range, not the other way around. So there are kind of tricky techniques to kind of get around it. But yeah, I think and now I've lost your question.
In the tech world, it's generally on a combination of salary and options, it's kind of complicated, but
Yeah,
I'm well compensated and for the work I do, and I would expect being well compensated here as well.
right, yes, something
Yeah,
like
So
that.
you just gotta, yeah, they're not gonna ask you for the paycheck stuff, right, so.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Although,
bonuses, and all kinds of ways you get paid.
oh goodness, yeah, and these days I literally deal with these types of problems for other people all day long. Like, so you start.
And you like your
I
job, see
know,
more
I love
jobs.
it. I was on call with an Irish lawyer at 6 AM, like, dealing with a compensation question. So, yeah, so, you learn little bits from each of these roles and you start like piecing together things. And I think, as long as you can tell a story for yourself, I tend to find, and now your question came back to me, is like being transparent is generally a good approach, I find. That being said, you don't have to actually disclose if you were laid off. Currently I'm interviewing for like, I think 4 or 5 different roles, not me interviewing people. People are interviewing and I'm the interviewer. And people are disclosing to me that they were laid off. And in this environment, it's actually extremely normal. And so just this week, I had someone say, yep, I was at Meta and I was laid off. And now I've been looking for a job for 8 months. So I would say even the norms around this have changed drastically in the last like 3 or 4 years. Now there's so much talent on the market. It is extremely normal to say you were laid off, and everyone kind of accepts that as it's unlikely to be due to performance issues. It's, there are mass layoffs everywhere. And so in this case, it doesn't harm this person's, potential with our company. Is half of the people that are interviewing are in the same boat. And if anything, they have more availability to interview with us. So we try to bring them along faster.
Let's do one more question.
I actually have 2 questions,
Yeah.
but the first is, you mentioned that you interviewed with Facebook 4 times, out of which twice it did not work.
It's true.
What was your takeaway from that, and what did you learn? How did you process
Yeah.
that?
So the one I remember, I'm gonna think, so the 2 where I was unsuccessful, one of them I was their second choice. And I remember so I'd gone through the entire thing and I was expecting to get the role. And I got the call and then, it was one of these, the recruiter said they're gonna call you. And how do they give you bad news over a phone call? I'm like, come on, I don't know, like to me that, I'd much rather receive that over email, like quickly, rather than like have you wait like 4 days to set up a phone call and then get bad news. But it was one of those, right? So I was ready to resign from my current role and got the disappointing news that I was second. The interesting thing was though, it didn't actually harm my chances in the future because I was high performing when I was at Facebook initially. I actually was promoted with my first 4 months there. So they kind of brought me in at the wrong level and then re-leveled me really quickly. And so if you looked at my history of performance, they're like, this person was a top performer. They came in and were second on an interview loop. We got all positive feedback. We chose this other person because they had more brand experience or whatever it was. So it wasn't too discouraging for me. If anything, it was like, I just need to find the right role there. And that's what I kept working towards. And, at that point, then I was at Uber and enjoying my job, but then I was faced with this dilemma of should I leave, should I interview again for user experience, and then weighing, well, could I be laid off with, returning and being in product? That sounds appealing. So that was kind of the decision there.
The reason I asked that question is because my follow-up was, as a recent graduate, especially if you're a PhD student, a full-time student who hasn't been in the industry for a long time now.
Yeah.
It is scary to step out.
Yeah.
And most of the times what students do is that once you're not receiving any response, you tend to just keep on applying like a blackboard,
Yeah.
hoping to hit somewhere.
Yeah.
And when you don't, how do you cope with it as an absolute pressure into the industry? Because I haven't worked, I'm an international student. So
Yeah.
for me, I'm like, do I really, should I graduate or not? Like, what
Strong
say?
support network, quite honestly, like you need the support at home. Like I've always used like coaching or therapy, or like I need some outlets. Like maintaining strong boundaries in your own life. Like I'm a runner. Again, I have 3 kids. I am a very active mom. I take my kids to after school activities. I just prioritize the things that are most important to me. And so I think if you're doing what you can to maintain your own mental health, that is what's going to carry you through. Eventually, with enough, time and effort, something will eventually transpire. It's just, you're in a difficult market right now, and it's just a matter of time. And so it's a little bit of having the faith and probably shifting the strategy, because I do think blindly applying, you're just in a sea of applicants, and with a lot of people with a lot of experience out of jobs right now. So shifting the strategy, 80% networking, 20% applying, that would be one piece of advice. And then really doubling down on your own care for yourself to make sure you're putting your best foot forward when you do get those opportunities to interview.
That's pretty good advice.
Hard.
Naomi, thank you so much for coming. Let's get right on.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, if anyone wants to chat, I think be around for a little bit, so.
Thank you so much for coming, and the online people viewing, and very much appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank
That was so
you.
interesting.
Oh, good. Yeah. Well, you know, I don't think I've gotten to tell the story in so much depth, and